All right, so here I am flatting again, and you'll notice this is pretty similar in some ways to our second exercise, the shape composition exercise. But the difference here is we're not using shape tools. We're not using vector shapes that then we're warping or distorting. We're trying to be pretty exact to fit our line work, to fill in these shapes. And you can see it gets a little bit more particular when you're running up two flat colors next to each other, especially when there's not a lot of inking or outline to separate them and they're not contained. So there's no real shortcuts for that except to have a steady hand and fix your mistakes when you make them. But this should now be a contained loop here. Looks like it is, that I can use my paint bucket for. I only have a tolerance of 12, but I have anti-alias checked and contiguous checked, so it should fill it in completely. It shouldn't leave any arbitrary openness. All right, but you'll notice I got it a little wrong on some of these edges, so that's when I'll zoom in. I'll use my brush again. This is why I love having a tablet with pressure sensitivity, and I can go on each side of that line. Just make sure those flats are as clean as possible. They don't need to be perfect. This is not a logo. This is a raster coloring job. But since my vector line work is so clean, I don't want to distract from it with sloppy coloring. Now, actually, I do like a little bit of sloppiness in some instances. So where this yellow flame is on top of the orange, see how the orange is going into the yellow a little bit? It looks like a silk screen that's a little misregistered. And when I think it adds to the effect, I think that's great. I don't even mind it there. I think I'll leave it there. So this can be an opportunity for some artistic license as well. Now remember, white isn't a color choice there, so when I am cutting away from the outside edge, I want to use my eraser and actually remove the material. And sometimes I will do this. Instead of a blank white background, I'll create another background layer and fill it with middle gray. And then lock that. And that way I can see all the color choices I've chosen. And that way you can actually see the white that's coming from the EPS layer here. But all I have to do to fix that, the reason I didn't try to take that white out, I tried quickly, but then it wasn't an easy Pathfinder solution, so I just left it in, is because I can just change that line work to multiply mode, and that will let everything come through from underneath. But then I'll lock it back up and go back to these flats. Okay, so that's looking good. That's just showing you how you can refine it at the end. But you don't need to get it perfect everywhere. In fact, as these flames kind of lift up, it might be interesting if the color starts to misalign a little bit more. Whoops. Make sure I'm on the right layer here. Go back to the paintbrush. Hit these edges again. A little bit looser now. But when I get out here, I have to switch to the eraser to cut away from it. All right. So So the next stage will be taking all of these flat colors and modulating their tones. So if you think of these as just local colors that are being put in temporarily, some of them better than others, we'll first select them and pick the perfect flat colors for them. What we think will really fit the mood of our piece. Because maybe everything's really reddish and rust colored in the image that I want. And so I wouldn't flat with all rust colored flat colors, because they're all so similar, they're not easy to select. But my next step after flatting would be to select each of these individual flat layers or flat color selections, and then change them to that form of rusty brown that I think would look best. And it makes ease of selection a lot easier. I think of it like an interactive coloring tool. Once you have these flats, it's like when you go to Home Depot to pick house paint, you can use this little computer program they have to show you what that color would look like in a living room photo. So that's what it will be like once we do the flats. But the hard work of flatting, all this arduous work is all about writing that program so that we can see those different options later. But just that warm-cool dynamic is already pretty dramatic and interesting. I think it's going to help. Now, if this were a professional job for me, I would expect a full color spot illustration like this with digital coloring, with this level of detail and this many textures and everything, to probably take me about 30 hours. That's a solid 4 days of work. Because I'm making it look very mechanical, like you just do this, then do this. But you want to allow yourself to experiment and take it into different directions, even if that does take more time when the opportunities arise. So I don't even have that many preconceived notions about what colors should go where yet. I'm still just working it out. But already in painting my cloud, I gave myself an indicator for where I want the orange flames to go. Here. To kind of connect through, even though there's no line for it. And then those flames pick up back here. Maybe a little slimmer, just like that. Very faint. Now that top edge is all defined for me by the blue, so I just have to define this bottom edge. And then the bottom edge is defined for me by the yellow. I just have to touch it, get to that spot. Then carry it from there. Remember that every other layer is locked. Actually, I think I might want to make that yellow, so let me just close it up now. So I'll just use a little bit more orange paint. Close it right there. Make sure that the blue and the orange touch so I can fill in this with the paint bucket. And then I'll just check it here with the line work turned off, make sure it is closed, and then fill it in. Hit it a few times just to make sure. Yeah, very nice. Now this, I want to use that yellow, and I can steal from my palette, but once it's the same local color, the same item, I can just steal from myself. And I'm kind of creating my own little color logic rules. So it's only the yellow that's allowed to touch the water in terms of the flames. It's my base color for what's going to become my hottest kind of source level flames, the white heat. Cut into this shape a little bit. There we go. All right, now I've got all of that flatted in. That's it on white, that's it on gray. Now I think I want to get the rocks and the water. So I've used the gray for the sword. That looks pretty cool. I think I'll use another gray for the rocks. So let's try. Let's see. It can be hard to tell which one you used. I think I used concrete for the sword, so I'm going to use this asbestos color for the rocks. Yeah, that's a different color. That'd be a good duotone shadow color. And actually, so I just started doing it without thinking, right? But because the top is all closed in, I just need to define the bottom. And get all of it. Not going to get too fancy. Try to close it into touching, then use my paint bucket. So it gets a little bit faster as you go. Same thing with this big rock. Just have to enclose it. So don't redraw the lines you've already painted if you can help it. And that's why we don't put each flat color on its own layer. It would waste a ton of memory, but it would also make it more work if you had to define each shape multiple, each line, each edge multiple times. Okay, but for these little rocks, I'll simply paint them in. Now some of these are rocks, some of these are little oil bubbles from the water. And then some of them are the fingers of the glove. So I use color to differentiate those. I think that will work. Oh, maybe. There we go. Maybe not there. That'll be the water. Let's see what we've got. Okay, yep, so far so good. Now this gray is different than that gray. You see, they'll select individually. And if I turn off contiguous now, it will select all the rock colors. And the reason it didn't select that or that is because that's a different color. Right? Especially if I take my tolerance down. Don't allow for any ambiguity. But I might as well erase that little test part. Now, even with the middle gray background, I can still see my colors. I try not to use middle gray as one of my flatting colors, so it does look a little different. All right, that's what we have so far. The benefit of having middle gray is it keeps you from choosing colors that are too dark. So once I get into his skin tones and things, I might turn that middle gray on, so that white isn't looking so glaring to me. But I'll do the middle gray more when I'm doing adjustments to my local colors, to my flats. For flatting, I can just kind of go on automatic. All right, I think I want to go with blue for the water, for lack of anything better. And the creative choice here is deciding what the outline of that water should be. How closely should it match with